Chapter 1. The Disappearing Act. Picture this. You're in labor, about to give birth to your first child, and a stranger walks into your hospital room claiming to be your husband's girlfriend. That's exactly what happened to me, and it changed everything. If you want to hear how this story unfolds, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. My name is Jessica, and until 8 months ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. My husband Mark and I had been married for 3 years, and we were expecting our first baby together. Mark was a construction project manager, and I worked as a nurse at the local community hospital until I went on maternity leave. When I found out I was pregnant, Mark seemed genuinely excited. He started talking about converting the spare bedroom into a nursery, researching the best baby gear, and even downloaded pregnancy apps to track our baby's development. For the first few months, he was the perfect expectant father. But around my 5th month of pregnancy, something shifted. Mark became distant and irritable. He started working longer hours, coming home late with explanations about demanding projects and difficult clients. When I tried to talk to him about baby names or nursery decorations, he seemed distracted and uninterested. "We have plenty of time for that stuff," he'd say, scrolling through his phone instead of looking at the paint samples I'd brought home. I attributed his behavior to stress. Construction work was physically demanding, and I knew he was worried about providing for our growing family. I tried to be understanding and supportive, even when his absence started to hurt. The late nights became more frequent. Mark would text me saying he had to stay late to finish a project, or that he was going out for drinks with his crew to discuss upcoming jobs. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until after midnight, stumbling into bed smelling like alcohol and cigarettes. When I expressed concern about his drinking, especially with a baby on the way, he became defensive. "I'm working my ass off for this family," he'd snap. "Can't I have a few beers with the guys to unwind?" I wanted to believe him, but something felt wrong. Mark had never been much of a drinker before, and he'd always been home for dinner unless he had a specific reason to be out. By my 7th month, Mark's behavior had become even more erratic. He would disappear for entire weekends, claiming he had emergency jobs that required him to travel to nearby towns. He stopped asking about my doctor's appointments and seemed annoyed when I tried to share updates about the baby's development. The worst part was how he made me feel guilty for needing him. When I asked him to come to my prenatal appointments, he'd sigh dramatically and make comments about how clingy I was becoming. "Jessica, you're perfectly capable of going to the doctor by yourself," he'd say. "I can't take time off work every time you have an appointment." But these weren't just routine checkups. I was having complications with my blood pressure, and the doctor wanted to monitor me closely. I needed my husband's support, but he acted like my pregnancy was an inconvenience. 3 weeks before my due date, Mark's disappearances became more frequent and longer. He'd leave on Friday night and not return until Sunday evening, always with vague explanations about work projects that required him to stay in nearby towns. "Why can't you just stay in town and drive back and forth?" I asked one Sunday night as he unpacked his overnight bag. "Because it's more cost-effective to stay there," he replied without looking at me. "Gas is expensive, and the client is paying for my hotel anyway." Something about his answer didn't ring true. Mark's construction company had strict policies about expense reimbursements, and I'd never known them to pay for hotel stays for local projects. I started paying closer attention to the details. Mark's work clothes didn't look particularly dirty when he came home from these supposed construction jobs. His hands weren't calloused or stained the way they usually were after a hard day of physical labor, and he seemed too well rested for someone who'd been working long hours in demanding conditions. One evening, I decided to call his supervisor to ask about the project that was keeping Mark away so much. I told myself I was just being a concerned wife, making sure he wasn't overworking himself. "What project?" his supervisor asked, sounding confused. "Mark requested time off for personal reasons. He said you were having pregnancy complications and he needed to be home with you." My blood ran cold. Mark had lied to his work about needing time off to be with me, but he'd lied to me about working extra hours. Where was he really going? That night, when Mark came home, I confronted him about the conversation with his supervisor. "I called your work today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your boss said you've been taking time off, not working extra hours." Mark's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "There must have been a miscommunication. I've been doing side jobs for a private client. My supervisor doesn't need to know about work I do on my own time." "What kind of side jobs?" "Renovation work for a woman who's fixing up an old house. She pays cash, so it's good extra money for the baby." The explanation sounded plausible, but something still felt off. "What's her name? Where's the house?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Why are you interrogating me? I'm working extra to provide for our family, and you're acting like I'm doing something wrong." "I'm not interrogating you. I'm just trying to understand why you've been so distant lately." "I haven't been distant. I've been working. There's a difference." But Mark had been distant, in ways that had nothing to do with work. He rarely touched me anymore, barely acknowledged my growing belly, and seemed completely disconnected from the reality that we were about to become parents. 2 weeks before my due date, Mark announced that he had a big job that would require him to be out of town for several days. "What if I go into labor while you're gone?" I asked. "You're not due for 2 weeks. First babies are usually late anyway." "But what if I'm not? What if something happens?" Mark sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Jessica, women have been having babies for thousands of years. You'll be fine. Besides, your sister lives 20 minutes away." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband was planning to leave town right before I was due to give birth to our first child, and he was acting like I was being dramatic for wanting him there. "Mark, this is our baby. Our first baby. I need you here. And I need to work. This job pays really well, and we're going to need the money once the baby comes. We have savings. We have insurance. We don't need the money more than I need my husband with me." "You're being selfish," Mark said coldly. "I'm trying to secure our financial future, and you're making it about your feelings." The accusation stung because it was so unfair. I wasn't being selfish. I was being realistic. Labor could start at any time, and I wanted my husband there to support me through one of the most important moments of our lives. But Mark left anyway. On a Thursday morning, 2 weeks before my due date, he packed his bag and headed out for what he claimed was a 3-day construction job in a town 2 hours away. "I'll be back Sunday night," he said, giving me a perfunctory kiss on the forehead. "Call me if anything important happens." I spent Thursday and Friday feeling anxious and alone. My sister Emma checked on me regularly, and my mother called every few hours, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with my marriage. Saturday morning, I woke up with cramping and realized I was in early labor. The contractions were mild at first, but they were regular and getting stronger. I called Mark immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. I tried calling several more times over the next hour as my contractions intensified. Each call went to voicemail. I left increasingly urgent messages explaining that I was in labor and needed him to come home immediately. By noon, I was in active labor and had to call my sister to drive me to the hospital. Emma was furious with Mark for being unreachable, but I was too focused on managing my pain to think about anything else. "Where the hell is he?" Emma asked as she helped me into the car. "I don't know," I said between contractions. "He's not answering his phone." At the hospital, the nurses kept asking about my husband. I had to explain over and over that he was out of town for work and wasn't answering his phone. I could see the judgment in their eyes. What kind of man leaves his pregnant wife alone right before her due date? Labor progressed quickly, and by evening, I was ready to push. My sister held my hand while I brought my daughter into the world without my husband by my side. It should have been one of the happiest moments of my life, but I felt heartbroken and abandoned. After Emma was born, we'd named her after my sister. I tried calling Mark again. This time his phone was turned off completely. I was exhausted, emotional, and angry. Where was my husband? Why wasn't he answering his phone? What kind of construction job required him to be completely unreachable when his wife was giving birth? The next morning, as I was nursing Emma and trying to process everything that had happened, a woman I'd never seen before walked into my hospital room. She was about my age, with blonde hair and a confident stride. She looked around the room like she belonged there, then focused on me with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. "You must be Jessica," she said. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" "I'm Rachel, Mark's girlfriend." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at this stranger who had just claimed to be my husband's girlfriend, holding my newborn daughter and trying to process what she'd just said. "I think there's been a mistake," I said weakly. "No mistake. Mark and I have been together for 6 months. He told me his wife was having a baby, and I wanted to see for myself." My world tilted on its axis. Everything suddenly made sense. The late nights, the weekend disappearances, the emotional distance, the lies about work. Mark hadn't been working extra jobs. He'd been living a double life. Chapter 2. The Other Woman's Story. I stared at Rachel, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Here I was, less than 24 hours after giving birth to my husband's child, and his girlfriend was standing in my hospital room. "I think you should leave," I said, my voice shaking. "I will. But first I think we should talk. We both deserve to know the truth about what Mark's been doing." My sister Emma had gone home to get some rest, and I was alone with my newborn daughter and this stranger who claimed to be sleeping with my husband. Part of me wanted to call security and have Rachel removed, but another part of me needed to hear what she had to say. "6 months?" I asked. Rachel nodded and sat down in the chair next to my bed, uninvited. We met at a bar near the construction site where he was working. He told me he was separated from his wife, that the divorce was almost final. I felt sick. "He told you we were getting divorced." "Not just divorced. He said you were vindictive and trying to trap him with the pregnancy. He said you got pregnant on purpose to prevent him from leaving." The cruelty of those lies took my breath away. Mark had painted me as some manipulative woman who'd tricked him into fatherhood, when in reality we'd been trying to get pregnant for months. "That's not true," I said. "We planned this pregnancy. We've been married for 3 years. Rachel's confident expression faltered slightly. "Married. He said you were just living together. We had a wedding. We have a marriage certificate. We bought a house together." I could see doubt creeping into Rachel's eyes, but she pressed on. "He's been staying at my apartment most weekends for the past 3 months, she said. "He has clothes there, a toothbrush, everything. He said he was just waiting for the baby to be born so he could file for custody and divorce you." I realized that Rachel wasn't just Mark's girlfriend. She was another one of his victims. He'd lied to her just as systematically as he'd lied to me. "Rachel, I think Mark has been lying to both of us." "What do you mean?" I reached for my phone and showed her photos from our wedding, pictures of Mark and me buying our house, images from earlier in my pregnancy when Mark had seemed excited about becoming a father. Rachel studied the photos, her face growing pale. "These are recent?" "The pregnancy photos were taken 4 months ago. Mark was the one who suggested we document the journey. He seemed genuinely happy about the baby. But he told me..." Rachel trailed off, clearly struggling to reconcile what she was seeing with what Mark had told her. "What exactly did he tell you about me?" Rachel looked uncomfortable, but she continued. "He said you were emotionally unstable, that you'd been trying to get pregnant to force him to stay with you. He said you threatened to kill yourself if he left." I felt a surge of anger at Mark's cruelty. Not only had he betrayed me, but he'd created an elaborate fiction to justify his behavior to his girlfriend. "I've never threatened suicide. I've never tried to trap him with a pregnancy. We've been happily married until recently, when he started acting distant and lying about where he was spending his time." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, she spoke. He's been telling me that once the baby was born and the divorce was final, we could get married and start our own family. He wants to marry you. That's what he said. He even looked at engagement rings with me last month. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. While I was preparing to give birth to our first child, Mark was shopping for engagement rings with another woman. Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Has Mark ever mentioned that he's still married? That there's no divorce in progress? Rachel's silence was answer enough. Oh God, she whispered. He's been lying to me too. It looks that way. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us trying to process the extent of Mark's deception. Finally, Rachel spoke again. I'm sorry. I didn't know he was still married. I would never have gotten involved with a married man, especially one whose wife was pregnant. I believe you, and I'm sorry too. You've been lied to just as much as I have. Rachel told me more about her relationship with Mark. According to her, he'd been the perfect boyfriend, attentive, romantic, and seemingly committed to their future together. He'd told her elaborate stories about his difficult marriage and his wife's unreasonable behavior. He said you were trying to alienate him from his friends and family, Rachel said. He said you were controlling and jealous. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mark had been describing his own behavior and projecting it onto me. Did he ever seem guilty about cheating on his pregnant wife? I asked. Rachel considered the question. Not guilty exactly, but he did seem stressed sometimes. He said it was because of the situation at home, because you were making the divorce difficult. There is no divorce, Rachel. I didn't even know our marriage was in trouble until a few months ago when he started acting strange. What kind of strange behavior? I told Rachel about Mark's increasing absences, his lies about work, his emotional distance, and his dismissive attitude toward my pregnancy. As I spoke, I could see recognition in her eyes. The weekends, she said suddenly. What about them? Mark told me he could only see me on weekends because that's when he didn't have to deal with you. He said you worked weekends and it was the only time he could get away. I haven't worked weekends since I went on maternity leave 2 months ago, and even before that, I rarely worked weekends. Rachel buried her face in her hands. I feel so stupid. I should have asked more questions. Don't blame yourself. Mark is clearly an expert at manipulation. He told me lies that made me doubt my own perceptions, and he told you lies that made you think I was the villain in this story. What are we going to do? It was a good question. I was lying in a hospital bed with a newborn baby, trying to figure out how to confront my husband about his affair and his plans to leave me for another woman. First, I think we need to talk to Mark together, I said. He needs to face both of us and explain himself without being able to play us against each other. Rachel nodded. Do you know where he is right now? He told me he was working a construction job out of town, but obviously that was a lie. Is he staying with you? He was supposed to come to my place last night, but he never showed up. I tried calling him this morning, but his phone went straight to voicemail. So Mark wasn't with Rachel, and he wasn't answering his phone for either of us. Where was he? Rachel, I need to ask you something else. Has Mark ever mentioned other women? Anyone besides me and you? Rachel's expression darkened. Why would you ask that? Because if he's capable of lying to both of us so completely, what's to stop him from lying to other people too? You think there might be someone else? I don't know. But a man who can maintain a double life for 6 months might be capable of more than we realize. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, There was something strange last month. Mark canceled our weekend plans at the last minute, saying he had a family emergency, but when I asked him about it later, he seemed vague about the details. What kind of family emergency? He said his sister was in the hospital, but when I mentioned it a few weeks later, He acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. Mark didn't have a sister. He was an only child. Something Rachel would have known if they'd been together as long as she claimed. Rachel, Mark doesn't have a sister. Her face went white. What? He's an only child. His parents divorced when he was young, and he was raised by his mother. But he talks about his sister all the time. He even showed me pictures. What kind of pictures? Photos on his phone of him with a woman he said was his sister. They looked close, like they spent a lot of time together. My heart sank. If Mark was showing Rachel pictures of himself with another woman and claiming she was his sister, there was definitely a third person involved in this mess. Rachel, I think we need to see those photos. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Web of Lies. Rachel pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photo gallery until she found the pictures Mark had shown her. Here, she said, handing me the phone. This is the woman he said was his sister. I looked at the photos and felt my world collapse further. The woman in the pictures was definitely not Mark's sister. She was someone I recognized from Mark's Facebook friends list. Her name was Lisa, and according to her profile, she was a real estate agent who worked in the next town over. This isn't his sister, I told Rachel. Her name is Lisa. I've seen her on his social media. So there is a third woman. We sat in stunned silence, both trying to process the magnitude of Mark's deception. He wasn't just cheating on me with Rachel. He was apparently involved with at least 3 women, all of whom believed they had exclusive relationships with him. How is this possible? Rachel asked. How can someone maintain relationships with 3 different women without any of us knowing? I've been thinking about that, I said. Mark's work schedule gave him a lot of flexibility. Construction projects happen at different sites, often in different towns. He could tell each of us that he was working somewhere else when he was actually with one of the others. And he told each of us different stories about his situation, Rachel added. He told you he was working extra jobs. He told me he was separated and going through a divorce. God knows what he told Lisa. I felt a surge of anger that temporarily overwhelmed my exhaustion and heartbreak. While I was growing his child inside my body, dealing with pregnancy complications, and preparing for motherhood, Mark was building an elaborate network of lies to support multiple relationships. We need to find Lisa, I said. Why? Because she deserves to know the truth, just like you did. And because I want to understand exactly how deep this goes before I decide what to do about my marriage. Rachel hesitated. Are you sure you want to know? Some things can't be unknown. I looked down at my sleeping daughter. Emma deserved better than a father who was capable of this level of deception and manipulation. I deserved better than a husband who could look me in the eye every day while living multiple lies. I need to know everything. Rachel helped me find Lisa's contact information through social media. Lisa's real estate profile listed her phone number and office address. After some debate, we decided to call her. I dialed the number while Rachel listened. Hello, this is Lisa Morrison with Premier Realty. Hi Lisa, my name is Jessica. I'm Mark Thompson's wife. There was a long pause. I'm sorry? Whose wife? Mark Thompson. I believe you know him. Jessica, I think there's been some confusion. Mark isn't married. My heart sank, but I pressed on. Lisa, I'm calling from the hospital where I just gave birth to Mark's daughter. We've been married for 3 years. That's impossible. Mark and I have been engaged for 4 months. Rachel's eyes widened, and I felt like I might vomit. Engaged? He proposed to me in October. We're planning a wedding for next spring. I put the call on speaker so Rachel could hear. Lisa, there's something you need to know. I'm here with another woman named Rachel, who's been dating Mark for 6 months. He told her that he was separated from me and planning to marry her. This is insane, Lisa said, her voice shaking. Who is this really? Is this some kind of prank? Rachel leaned toward the phone. Lisa, this isn't a prank. Mark has been lying to all of us. He's married to Jessica. He's been telling me he was going to divorce her and marry me. And apparently, he's also engaged to you. I don't believe this. I could hear the denial in Lisa's voice, and I understood it. An hour ago, I wouldn't have believed it either. Lisa, I can prove everything I'm telling you. I can send you photos of our wedding, our marriage certificate, pictures from my pregnancy. Mark was at my prenatal appointments until a few months ago. Send them, Lisa said curtly. I quickly sent Lisa several photos through text message. Our wedding photos, pictures of Mark and me at various prenatal appointments, and a recent photo of Mark assembling the crib in our nursery. We waited in tense silence for Lisa to review the evidence. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered. "These photos, when were these taken?" The pregnancy photos are from the past 6 months. The nursery photo was taken 3 weeks ago. But Mark told me he lived alone. I've been to his apartment. Rachel and I exchanged glances. "What apartment?" I asked. "He has a 1-bedroom apartment downtown. He said he was saving money to buy a house after we got married." "Lisa, Mark lives with me in the house we bought together 2 years ago. I've never heard of any apartment." "This can't be real," Lisa said, but her voice lacked conviction. Rachel spoke up. "Lisa, what has Mark told you about his work schedule?" "He works construction, mostly out-of-town projects. He's gone during the week but comes home on weekends." "He told me the opposite," Rachel said. "He said he was available on weekends because that's when he didn't have to deal with his wife. And he's been telling me he's working extra jobs on weekends," I added. The pattern was becoming clear. Mark had structured his lies so that each woman thought she had him during different times, when in reality, he was juggling all 3 relationships simultaneously. "Lisa, I need to ask you something," I said. "Have you ever been suspicious about Mark's situation? Has anything seemed off?" There was a long pause. "Actually, yes. There have been things that didn't make sense." "Like what?" "He never wanted me to come to his apartment unexpectedly. He said he preferred to plan our time together in advance. And he was always vague about his family and his past." "What did he tell you about his family?" "He said his parents were dead and he didn't have any siblings. He said he'd learned to be independent because he didn't have anyone to rely on." This was yet another version of Mark's life story. He'd told me his parents were divorced, and he'd told Rachel he had a sister. "Lisa, Mark's mother is very much alive," I said. "She was at our wedding, and she's been excited about becoming a grandmother." "I think I'm going to be sick," Lisa said. "Lisa, where do you think Mark is right now?" Rachel asked. "I don't know. He was supposed to take me to dinner last night, but he canceled at the last minute. He said he had a work emergency." So Mark had left me to go into labor alone, stood up Rachel, and canceled plans with Lisa, all on the same night. Where had he actually been? "Has he done this before?" I asked. "Canceled plans suddenly?" "More often lately," Lisa admitted. "He always has explanations, but they've been getting more elaborate." We talked for another 20 minutes, sharing information about Mark's behavior patterns and comparing the different stories he'd told each of us. The picture that emerged was of a man who had created an incredibly complex web of lies to support multiple relationships. What struck me most was how differently he'd presented himself to each of us. To me, he was a committed husband, excited about starting a family. To Rachel, he was a man trapped in an unhappy marriage who wanted to start fresh with her. To Lisa, he was a successful bachelor ready to settle down. "What do we do now?" Lisa asked. "I think we need to confront him together," I said. "All 3 of us." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Rachel asked. "He might just deny everything." "He can't deny the evidence we have. Between the 3 of us, we have enough proof to expose every lie he's told." "When?" Lisa asked. "As soon as possible. I'm being discharged from the hospital tomorrow morning. We could meet at my house." The house Mark doesn't think either of you know about." Both women agreed. As we made plans for the confrontation, I felt a strange sense of solidarity with Rachel and Lisa. We were all victims of the same man's elaborate deception, and we deserved answers. After we ended the call with Lisa, Rachel stayed with me for a few more hours. We talked about our relationships with Mark, trying to understand how we'd all been so completely fooled. "The thing that bothers me most," Rachel said, "is how convincing he was. I really believed that he loved me, that we had a future together." "I understand. I've been married to him for 3 years, and I thought I knew him completely. Do you think he actually loves any of us?" It was a question I'd been asking myself since Rachel walked into my hospital room. "I don't think Mark is capable of real love. I think he's capable of performing love when it serves his purposes." "What kind of person does this?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Chapter 4. The Final Confrontation. The next morning, I was discharged from the hospital with my newborn daughter. My sister Emma picked us up and drove us home, where I was confronted with the physical reminders of the life I'd thought Mark and I were building together. The nursery he'd helped me set up, the baby clothes we'd bought together, the birth plan we'd written, which had assumed he'd be there to support me through labor. Emma was furious when I told her about Rachel's visit and what we'd discovered about Mark's other relationships. "I never liked him," she said as she helped me get settled. "There was always something fake about his charm. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have listened? You were so in love with him." She was right. I'd been so convinced that Mark was perfect that I'd probably dismissed any criticism as jealousy or misunderstanding. Rachel and Lisa arrived at my house that afternoon. It was surreal, sitting in my living room with 2 women who'd been sleeping with my husband, all of us united in our desire for answers. Lisa was shaken by seeing the house Mark shared with me. "He really does live here," she said, looking around at the photos of Mark and me throughout our relationship. "For 3 years," I confirmed. "I feel so stupid," Lisa said. "How did I not know he was married?" "Because he's an expert manipulator," Rachel said. "He told each of us exactly what we needed to hear to trust him." We spent an hour comparing notes and preparing for Mark's return. I'd sent him a text that morning saying I'd given birth and needed him to come home immediately. He'd responded with congratulations and promised to be home by evening. At 6 o'clock, we heard Mark's truck in the driveway. Through the window, I watched him get out and walk toward the house, carrying flowers and what looked like a baby gift. He had no idea what was waiting for him inside. Mark opened the front door and called out, "Jessica, I'm home. Where's my beautiful daughter?" "We're in the living room," I called back. Mark walked into the living room with a huge smile on his face, which immediately disappeared when he saw Rachel and Lisa sitting on the couch. "What the hell is going on?" he asked, his face going pale. "That's what we'd like to know," I said calmly. "Mark, I'd like you to meet your girlfriend Rachel and your fiancée Lisa." Mark stood frozen in the doorway, looking like a deer caught in headlights. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed completely at a loss for words. "I can explain," he finally said. "Please do," Rachel said coldly. "Explain how you've been engaged to Lisa while telling me you were going to marry me, all while being married to Jessica." Mark's eyes darted between the 3 of us, clearly trying to calculate his options. "This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Lisa stood up, her voice shaking with anger. "Because it looks like you've been living a triple life, lying to all of us about who you are and what you want." "Lisa, let me explain." "No," I interrupted. "We're done with explanations. We've already compared notes, Mark. We know about the different apartments, the fake family members, the elaborate work schedules you created to keep us separated." Mark sat down heavily in the chair across from us, finally understanding that his web of lies had completely unraveled. "How long were you planning to keep this up?" Rachel asked. "Were you ever going to choose one of us? Or were you just going to keep lying forever? I never meant for it to get this complicated, Mark said weakly. Complicated? I couldn't keep the fury out of my voice. Mark, I gave birth to your daughter yesterday, alone, while you were off doing God knows what instead of being there for the birth of your child. I'm sorry about that. I really am. Where were you? You weren't with Rachel, you weren't with Lisa, and you obviously weren't working. Where were you? Mark was quiet for a long moment. I was driving around trying to figure out what to do. About what? About all of this. About how to handle the situation. Lisa laughed bitterly. Handle the situation? Mark, the situation is that you're a liar and a cheat who's been manipulating 3 women for months. It's not that simple, Mark said. Then make it simple, I said. Tell us the truth, all of it. Mark took a deep breath. I never meant for any of this to happen. Rachel, when we met, I was going through a rough patch in my marriage. I told you I was separated because that's how I felt emotionally. But you weren't actually separated, Rachel said. No. And Lisa, when did you start seeing her? Mark looked at Lisa apologetically. About 8 months ago. 8 months? Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. You were seeing me before you started seeing Rachel? Lisa, I can explain. No, Lisa said, standing up. I don't want to hear any more lies. 8 months ago, Jessica would have been 4 months pregnant. You started seeing me while your wife was pregnant with your child. The timeline made everything worse. Mark hadn't just cheated on me during my pregnancy. He'd started building relationships with other women while I was carrying his baby. Why? I asked. Why did you do this to us? Mark was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I was scared. Scared of what? Of being tied down, of having responsibilities, of growing up. So you decided to create multiple fantasy lives where you could be whoever you wanted to be? I guess. Rachel shook her head in disgust. Mark, we're all adults here. If you weren't ready for marriage and fatherhood, you should have said so before you got married and got your wife pregnant. I know. I know I handled everything wrong. Wrong? Lisa's voice was getting louder. Mark, wrong is forgetting an anniversary or being thoughtless about someone's feelings. This is sociopathic behavior. I'm not a sociopath, Mark protested. Really? Because normal people don't lie this extensively to multiple people they claim to love. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and realized I didn't know this person at all. The man I'd married, the father of my child, was a stranger capable of levels of deception I couldn't have imagined. What happens now? I asked. Mark looked at me hopefully. Maybe we can work through this. Get counseling. Start over. With which one of us? Rachel asked sarcastically. I want to try to save my marriage, Mark said. Jessica, we have a baby together. We have a life together. No, Mark. We had a life together. You destroyed it when you decided to create fake lives with other women. But the baby deserves better than a father who's capable of this level of deception. She deserves a parent she can trust. Mark turned to Rachel and Lisa. I know I hurt you both, and I'm sorry. I never meant for things. You know that moment when your whole world shatters, and you're left holding the pieces, not just for yourself, but for someone new. That was my reality. If you've ever felt betrayed, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.